Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks, Keith, for agreeing to free the budget for this to finally happen after many years of dealing with these issues. And this is I'm really excited and a little bit relieved. Probably I'll be more relieved by the end of today if everything works out fine. But also thank you so much to all the guests that are coming to talk about their research that relates to this, and also to the students. And half of the people here have been involved in the workshops and in the process of making all of this happen. So thank you to all of you too. So I'll just try to talk very briefly about where the StreetSpace project comes, how did it turn into Superdiverse Streets and Heritage at Risk. And maybe it's just a way of telling you a personal journey that I've been through to get to this. Before we start, I'll just give you an overview of the people that will be talking today. I will start, then Anna, Chris, and James, who are my PhD students, will make short presentations of their work. Gordon Clark from Sustrans will talk about street mobility. Sol Golden from UU, then Jane Klossek from London Met, Philip Crow from UCD, and after lunch, Matthew Carmona will be giving his keynotes, who's from the Bartlett. And there's going to be a walk at 2 p.m. Through North Street and Castle Street, which are the main characters of today. And then the public opening of the exhibition with Glenn Patterson opening it at 5, and then a performance of Connor and Matilda from the Sound Group. So I really hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about StreetSpace and where this comes from. You've heard about streetscapes, I suppose, and there's quite a lot of writing about that. But I always thought that streets, the best value of them is as public spaces and as places. And there's something I always tell when I start these lectures, which is how I came up with the idea, which was after a couple of glasses of wine with Nasa Horrigan, talking about our trip to Rome, where we took students, and we were asking ourselves, why are streets in Rome so good? And also, why are they so good in other parts of Italy or in other parts of Europe? Or what are the things that make really, really good streets everywhere, even in Belfast? And then I was asked to do a pechacucha by students last year. And it was about somehow the journey of how we get to what we were doing as lecturers. And one of the things that struck me was that I've been interested in streets all my life. Even though I did my PhD, I studied architecture, did my PhD about urban history. There's always been something about public space, and streets are the places that we all live in. And we don't need to be architects or practitioners of any built environment discipline to know that streets are really the most kind of present public space that we experience. So these are a series of streets that I either lived in or stayed in for a while. This is in Guatemala. That must be 1978. This is Jorge VI in Chile, in Santiago, which is a kind of low-rise combination of houses and businesses. Spitalgas in Bern, where my dad used to work, in that first floor there, the sidewalks are covered because it's so cold and also very sunny in the summer. So there's something about all the thresholds in those streets that are really interesting. Via dei Martelli in Florence, and all these different levels of different thresholds between ground floor and the top floors, and shops on the ground floor, and all kinds of services, and people living on top of every single one of those shops. And Buenos Aires, that's quite an exception. All of Buenos Aires is a grid, a very straight grid. And this used to be a river that passed through the city. So the street where I lived in was slanted compared to the normal regular grid. And it was a very narrow one compared to the others, but it also had that very balanced combination of, in the Bank District of Buenos right? People living there, families, elderly, young people, couples, singles, all kinds of housing on top of shops, restaurants. There's an electrician shop at the corner, a market at the other corner. There was a shop that sold coal that shut down in the 80s, but when I lived there, it was still there. The Ramblas in Barcelona, of course, I mean, it's talked about by all the people who write about streets, but it's a wonderful place, mostly when it's that kind of weather, because then it's a little bit emptier. It's not packed with tourists, and it's kind of exceptional in its own way. Every single one of the canals in Amsterdam has also this really good proportion of the relationship between the built environment and the way it's used. And again, this mix of uses, a very good proportion of height and thresholds, and a very kind of clear threshold between the outside and the inside, the public and the private. And then Callao in Buenos Aires, where my parents live, I was just there last week. And again, it's a much taller, a lot higher buildings, but they're still, even though the height of many of these buildings is slightly different, it doesn't have the regularity of Paris, for example, but it still has this very balanced. There's people on the street all the time. And why are there people on the street all the time? Because they live there and they're able to go to the shop. I've been talking about urban grannies lately. My daughter's granny can walk to the shop, go to the theater, meet her friends for coffee, go to the gym, all in about 3 blocks distance. And it's a place where there's offices too. There's all kinds of different uses. So bottom line, what do all these streets have in common? Are all those things I'm talking about: the diversity, the flexibility, the good proportions, the thresholds. And these are things that relate the built environment with the way these places are used by people. And who are the people? There's all kinds of people. And one of the things that we came up with throughout the workshops was that a lot of urban designers talk about people, but they don't really mention who those people are and how different those people are from each other. So that's one of the things that has struck me. And this is a bit of the motivation for this research. The other thing is, so we come to Belfast. I arrived to Belfast in 2010. And as Declan Hill sometimes says, I came out of the railway station. I looked both ways. I came from Dublin in the train, and I don't understand where I am. And it's called Central Station. And it's on a street that is not a street. It's a road. But it's a bridge, too. And it doesn't have anything to bind it. You don't know where you are. So one of the things about good streets is that you understand where you are. You understand what's happening around you. You understand what it connects you with. So what happened in Belfast is that the tight fabric that was there until at least 1969, with the series of plans of the 1960s and then 70s and 80s, it became that type of city. So the other thing that's happening is demolition of buildings like the Orpheus down in on York Street, which is going to be replaced by that. Well, it's already being built, and you just kind of ask yourself, mainly, this is not a question of architectural aesthetics. It has to do with the way this type of building relates to the ground floor and the way these types of buildings relate to the ground floor. When there's fences all around them, as you see, parked cars just behind the fences, so the sidewalks become absolutely dead. So I started the project with street sections done by first years in different parts of the world. I did in Belfast, in Edinburgh, in Kilkenny, and in Buenos Aires. And the interesting thing was that the best thing was not the sections themselves, but the questions that those sections raised. And that led to the workshop of North Street, which is one of the course of the exhibition today, in which people from different disciplines, geography, Keith Lilly, Kieran Connell, Connor from Sonic Arts, and James Hennessy presented their ways of understanding streets. And then we came up with a series of layers, but this is all going to be explained by itself on the publication and the exhibition itself. But there was a group of sound, a group analyzing how designers and planners talk about streets, another group looking at the historic geography, and another group looking at how people perceive streets. So they did a lot of interviews around the street. And that led to the master's program of last year, of 2015-16, in which we looked very specifically at North Street and mapped many, many different layers of it, and that's going to be in the publication of the maps. And then came the workshop of Castle Street at the same time that we were doing the master studio, looking at the corridor between City Hall and Queen's University. So just to finish up, a couple of quotes of what makes streets significant. Joseph Reichert said, "The street is human movement institutionalized. More than a mere traffic channel ensconced within the city's solid mesh. The street is a complex civic institution, culture-specific, and capable of dazzling formal variation and calculated nuance." And I know this is full of very complex terms, but if you read it carefully, it carries all the weight of how important streets are, and that's Spyro Kostov in 1991. And then Jan Gehl, he said this in '89, but it's very much in the spirit of the urban design firms who deal with public spaces like streets. The street is the largest stage in the city and the most used, and that's an image from Culture Night in Belfast. Then I more recently came across Susie Hall's research and on Superdiverse streets, and she talks about not just looking at gentrification, but what are all the elements that makes these places so complex. So I'll just run through the images that you'll be able to see more closely in the maps and the publication. This is the aspirations map, the perceptions map. This is the aspiration map with all the plans that have been done for the area that we've been looking at, and an analysis of all the elements that urban design and planning describes that streets are. This is the history map with all the different layers of what happened to the area that you'll see at the walk too. And finally, the sound map that Connor and their group analyzed with all the different analysis of thresholds and many other. So that's me for now. I'll be in all day, so there's if you have any specific questions right now, go ahead, but I'd rather leave the questions for the end, if that's okay. Thank you.